A corrupt white police officer, driven by deep-seated racism, brazenly attacked a black woman in the middle of a crowded market, suspecting her of suspicious activity. Without warning, he lunged at her, throwing brutal and merciless punches. But what he didn't know, this woman was far from an ordinary citizen. She was a seasoned CIA agent on an undercover mission. Handcuffed and dragged to the police station like a criminal, she seemed to have no way out. But within hours, the tide had turned. A 12-year-old boy had recorded the entire incident, exposing the truth for the world to see. The officer, once untouchable, now found himself in handcuffs, thrown behind bars as the stunned community watched in disbelief. What happened? How did an injured and seemingly helpless woman turn the tables so dramatically? Join us as we unravel this gripping story to uncover the truth. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a comment about where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories of justice and courage. The sluggish hum of old, rusted car engines echoed through the crumbling streets of Southside Chicago, where rows of peeling red brick buildings stood as silent witnesses to a bygone era of prosperity. The sidewalks, cracked and stained with oil and shattered glass, reflected the dim neon glow of small, struggling convenience stores. The air was thick with the scent of cheap liquor, cigarette smoke, and the greasy aroma of fast food from makeshift street vendors lining the corners. A chaotic symphony of honking cars, murmured conversations, and bass-heavy rap music blasting from a battered speaker added to the restless energy of the neighborhood, one infamous for its violence and crime. Amidst this urban disorder, Claire Danes moved silently, blending seamlessly into the crowd like a ghost. A gray hoodie concealed most of her face, paired with faded jeans and worn-out sneakers. To any casual observer, she looked like just another local. But beneath the unassuming exterior lay the sharp instincts and meticulous awareness of a veteran CIA operative. With over a decade of experience at the Central Intelligence Agency, Claire had seen her share of dangerous missions. Yet, this one felt different, heavier. She wasn't here for leisure or casual shopping. She was on an undercover assignment, tracking an illicit arms trafficking network that posed a severe threat to national security. Confidential sources had warned of a major weapons deal taking place right in this neighborhood. Claire knew that if she didn't act quickly, the consequences could be catastrophic. Her superiors wanted more solid evidence before moving in, but Claire wasn't one to sit back and watch. She understood that in the world of intelligence, timely action often made the difference between success and failure. Tucked inside the small crossbody bag at her side was a miniature recording device and an encrypted drive capable of storing crucial intelligence without detection. Her fingers instinctively brushed against the strap, performing one final check on the essentials. Every step she took was deliberate, her face betraying no emotion, but her mind remained on high alert. She knew that Southside Chicago wasn't just dangerous because of its crime rate. It was a breeding ground for corruption and abuse of power. Stories of police officers turning a blind eye to criminal activity, or worse, being directly involved, were common knowledge here. But Claire wasn't afraid. She had long been accustomed to navigating dangerous territory and keeping herself alive. Still, something about this mission felt off. A faint, nagging intuition whispered that things wouldn't go as planned. Claire wasn't just up against criminals. She was about to collide with a hidden force embedded within the very system meant to uphold justice. Then, her phone vibrated with a short, cryptic message. Corner of the street. 3 p.m. Look for the red scarf. She exhaled slowly. The game had begun. Claire's eyes narrowed, her senses instantly tightening like a coiled spring. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, quickly scanning her surroundings before melting into the moving crowd. As she advanced deeper into the district, she moved with careful precision, feigning casual interest in the street vendors displaying rows of counterfeit watches and worn-out jackets. But beneath the surface of her indifferent gaze, every fiber of her being was on high alert. She wasn't just searching for her target. She was scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Years of experience had taught her that even the smallest mistake could prove fatal. It didn't take long before she spotted him. A thin, wiry man with hollowed-out cheeks stood at the edge of an abandoned building, a faded red scarf loosely draped around his neck, just as described. His jittery hands fumbled inside his jacket pockets and his restless eyes darted around, filled with unease. Claire recognized the signs immediately. He was a low-level arms dealer, nervous about being watched or double-crossed. Keeping a safe distance, she used the reflective surface of a nearby store window to observe him without drawing attention. Her fingers hovered over the tiny recording device in her bag, ready to activate it. But just as she prepared to make her move, a subtle shift at the end of the street caught her attention. A gentle breeze carried with it an undeniable sense of unease. 2 uniformed police officers had entered the area, but their presence didn't feel routine. Their posture was too stiff, their gazes too intense, like predators on the hunt. Leading the pair was Stephen, a towering officer with a closely cropped haircut and a faint scar beneath his chin. His expression was as cold as steel, and the smirk tugging at his lips hinted at an unchecked arrogance. Stephen wasn't just a cop. He was someone who enjoyed wielding power, using his authority as a weapon. Beside him was Carson, a younger officer with a lean frame and a face caught between confidence and hesitation. He was trying to keep up with Stephen's pace, but his uncertain steps betrayed a discomfort with the situation. Claire immediately recognized that Carson still had a shred of conscience left, but his inexperience made him an easy pawn under Stephen's influence. Something was off. Stephen wasn't scanning the area like a patrol officer looking for disturbances. His sharp eyes were searching, hunting. When his gaze locked onto Claire, she instantly felt the weight of something more sinister than mere suspicion. This wasn't about her actions. This was about the way she looked. It was the gaze of a man who had already judged her, not based on evidence, but on prejudice and unchecked authority. A chill ran down Claire's spine. She quickly forced herself to appear calm, maintaining the illusion of idly browsing through the street vendors' merchandise. But she knew she had just landed in Stephen's crosshairs. The feeling was familiar. She had faced dangerous men before, men who abused their power. But this time, the danger wasn't coming from a criminal operating outside the law. It was coming from someone who was supposed to enforce it. Stephen murmured something to Carson before striding towards Claire with deliberate steps. His heavy boots struck the pavement with a weight of dominance, his smirk widening slightly. This wasn't a friendly approach. This was a man accustomed to exerting control and relishing it. Claire inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. But her pulse quickened. She knew she couldn't let this situation escalate any further. If she were exposed as a CIA agent now, things would become far more complicated. But if she did nothing, Stephen could create a serious problem, one that could jeopardize her entire operation to track the arms trafficking network. In that fleeting moment, Claire had to make a choice: remain in the shadows or confront a corrupt cop head-on. As she weighed her options, her eyes caught sight of a young boy standing at the corner of the street, his curious gaze flickering between her and Stephen. It was Jamal, a 12-year-old with sharp, observant eyes. He stood quietly at a distance, but Claire could see the intelligence and caution in his expression. Jamal had witnessed situations like this before. Cops arriving, stirring up trouble, and then disappearing, leaving the residents to deal with the aftermath. Claire knew that whatever move she made next could affect the boy and the innocent people around her. But she also knew that the game had officially begun, and this time, it wasn't just her life on the line, it was the truth itself, waiting to be exposed in the heart of a neighborhood plagued by injustice. Stephen continued to approach, each step of his boot striking the concrete with a weighty, deliberate force as if carrying an unspoken threat. Claire remained calm, but her sharp eyes had already discerned something crucial. He was not just another cop on patrol. Stephen carried something far more insidious, a toxic arrogance, the kind that came from years of unchecked abuse of power. Across the street, Jamal, a 12-year-old boy with unruly curls and sharp, intelligent eyes, crouched beside an old bicycle. He had merely been waiting for his mother to come out of a nearby convenience store. But his perceptive gaze had quickly locked onto the tense interaction unfolding between Claire and Stephen. Growing up in the slums of Southside Chicago, Jamal was no stranger to confrontations between the police and the locals. Here, cops weren't symbols of protection or justice. They were often predators, imposing their authority on the powerless. But something about this encounter was different. Something that made it impossible for Jamal to look away. Claire wasn't like the people he usually saw being harassed by the police. She didn't appear afraid or confused. Her stance, while relaxed, radiated an unusual confidence. But Jamal also noticed Stephen's eyes, cold and calculating, the gaze of a man who had already marked his prey, ready to strike without a shred of justification. Stephen was now mere steps away from Claire. His smirk had vanished, replaced by an icy glare. He gave a slight nod to Carson, a silent signal that a baseless stop and search was about to take place. Claire, unfazed, understood that she was being pushed into a corner. Any reaction that was too forceful could escalate the situation beyond control. Sensing the rising tension, Jamal felt a familiar unease creeping up his spine. But, unlike before, he didn't want to look away this time. He had to do something. His old phone, bought secondhand by his mother, had always been just a device for playing music or simple games. But right now, it had become his only weapon. With practiced stealth, Jamal slipped the phone out of his pocket, quietly switched on the video recording mode, and aimed the camera at Claire and Stephen. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. In this neighborhood, evidence was the only thing that could expose the truth. But at the same time, getting caught recording the police could put him in real danger. The murmur of the marketplace seemed to fade as Stephen closed the final gap between them, his presence looming like a shadow. His piercing gaze held no attempt at concealment, only contempt and a silent challenge. He stopped just a few steps away from Claire, close enough that she could feel the weight of his heavy, threatening breath. "What are you doing here? This isn't a place for people like you." His voice was low and deliberate, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Claire didn't need to be particularly perceptive to catch the racist undertone in his remark. This wasn't just a question. It was a warning. A way for Stephen to assert his power and remind her that, in his mind, she didn't belong. Claire lifted her chin slightly, her expression unshaken. "I'm shopping," she replied, her voice even but firm. "Is there a problem?" Her response wasn't just an answer. It was a stance, a refusal to be intimidated by a bully in uniform. Stephen's smirk deepened into something more malicious, his pride pricked by her defiance. He wasn't used to people standing their ground, especially not from a woman like Claire. "You don't look like you're from around here," he repeated, his tone heavier now, pressing. "Or maybe you're up to something." Claire remained steady, her gaze locking onto Stevens with quiet intensity. "If you think I've done something wrong, I'm happy to cooperate," she said, voice unwavering. "But if you don't have a valid reason, you have no right to harass me." Her words were a slap in the face to Stevens' arrogance. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already decided was beneath him. His eyes darkened, and, without warning, he reached for Claire's bag. "Open your bag," he ordered, his voice stripped of all pretense of professionalism. Claire knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about suspicion or protocol. This was about power. If she refused, the situation would escalate fast. But complying wouldn't necessarily help either, especially against men like Stephen, who enjoyed power more than justice. "You don't have a legitimate reason to request that," she replied, voice steady. "If you want to check my belongings, tell me why." Stephen didn't need a reason. He only needed an excuse. A flicker of frustration flashed across his face. He didn't bother replying. Instead, he snatched Claire's bag from her shoulder, the force of the action drawing immediate attention from the surrounding crowd. With a violent thud, he slammed the bag onto a vendor's table, scattering its contents. A wallet, a phone, a few crumpled receipts. Nothing suspicious. Claire clenched her fists at her sides, resisting the instinct to retaliate. She knew better. Stephen's fingers dug through her belongings, his expression contorting in frustration when he found nothing incriminating. But rather than backing off, he lifted the empty bag high, as if declaring victory over a non-existent crime. "This is what you call cooperation?" he sneered, before tossing the bag carelessly back toward Claire, a clear act of public humiliation. The crowd was no longer passive. Murmurs rose, eyes locked onto the scene, phones appeared, and across the street Jamal's phone remained fixed on the unfolding injustice, his young eyes burning with determination. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a routine stop and search. This was outright abuse of power. Claire took a deep breath, her gaze never wavering. "You're crossing a line," she said, her voice razor sharp. "This is harassment, and you know it." For the first time, Stephen hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty quickly masked. But the damage had been done. His pride was wounded, his authority was challenged. His eyes darkened further, and then he stepped forward, closing the final distance between them. "You want to see what happens when you don't cooperate with the police?" he growled. His hand drifted toward his holster, not to draw, but to send a message. A silent threat. The air around them turned ice cold. Claire knew the situation had reached a boiling point. One wrong move and everything could spiral out of control. But she also knew she couldn't back down. And as her unwavering stare met Stephen's, she understood. This confrontation was far from over. The air was thick with tension, a string pulled so tight it was ready to snap. Stephen's eyes locked onto Claire, his face dark with unrestrained fury at her unwavering defiance. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and phones were lifted, recording every second. But instead of deterring him, the growing attention only stoked the fire of his rage. Stephen was not used to being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by someone he believed was beneath his control. Without warning, his hand shot out, gripping Claire's wrist in a crushing hold, his fingers pressing deep into her skin like a vice. "I told you to cooperate." His voice was a low growl, each word laced with threat and authority. His grip was so tight that pain shot through Claire's wrist, but she didn't flinch. She knew this had gone too far. She couldn't allow Stephen to maintain control of this situation. As a highly trained CIA operative, Claire understood that silence and submission only emboldened men like him. She took a deep breath, her gaze flickering briefly to the watching crowd before making her decision. With a swift, precise motion, Claire twisted her body, using the momentum of her hips to break free from his grasp. The moment her arm was free, she delivered a brutal elbow strike straight to his jaw. Crack! The sharp snap echoed through the air as the blow connected, sending Stephen stumbling back, clutching his chin in shock and pain. His eyes widened in disbelief, his fury turning into something dangerous and unpredictable. For a moment, silence blanketed the crowd. No one moved. Jamal, still filming from the corner, gaped in astonishment, but his hands remained steady, capturing everything. Then came the whispers, the shift in the air. Some stared in awe at Claire's bold resistance. Others held their breath, fearing the inevitable retaliation. What would you do in Claire's situation? Would you fight back like she did, or try to stay calm and wait for help? Share your thoughts in the comments. Stephen quickly regained his footing, but his face was now a mask of pure rage. A thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth, but instead of making him hesitate, it only made him more dangerous. With a jerk of his arm, he yanked his radio from his belt and barked into it. "Requesting backup at Southside Market. Suspect resisting arrest and assaulting an officer." Those words, backed by the authority of his police uniform, instantly transformed Claire from a victim of harassment into a dangerous suspect in the eyes of law enforcement. Claire knew this well. She had witnessed how simple words could turn the truth upside down, especially when coming from someone like Stephen. The distant wail of sirens signaled the arrival of reinforcements. Claire quickly scanned the area, assessing the situation. Carson, Stephen's younger partner, had taken a step back, his gaze wavering between fear and uncertainty. He didn't know what to do, but it was clear he was uncomfortable with Stephen's actions. However, his lack of experience and the fear of getting caught in the mess held him in place. Claire took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on Jamal. At that moment, their eyes met. Claire realized the phone in his hand and understood that he had recorded the entire incident. It might be the only card she had left to turn the situation around if things escalated. Despite the pain, Stephen wouldn't let up. He lunged forward, intent on subduing Claire, but Claire was ready. She stepped back, keeping her distance, her body already in a defensive stance. Claire didn't want this to escalate into a full-blown public altercation, but she couldn't let herself be taken without a fight. The sound of police sirens grew louder. Claire knew she had to decide quickly: escape before being surrounded, or risk falling into the hands of those who would twist the truth. And in that brief moment, a bold plan began to take shape in her mind. This was no longer a battle between her and Stephen. It was a fight between truth and abuse of power, and no matter the outcome, Claire knew she could not let someone like Stephen win so easily. The blaring sirens swallowed the city noise, merging with the low murmurs of the growing crowd. Metal security shutters screeched as vendors hurried to close shop, sensing the impending chaos. The rhythmic stomp of approaching boots signaled that reinforcements had arrived. Claire stood at the eye of the storm, unwavering as she faced Stephen, who was still gripping his swollen jaw, his fury burning beneath his skin. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt, their tires skidding against the grimy asphalt. Red and blue lights flickered, casting an eerie, chaotic glow over the street. 4 officers spilled out, hands hovering near their weapons, scanning the scene before zeroing in on Claire, the violent suspect they had been warned about. Stephen, despite his bruised jaw, stood tall. He spit a drop of blood onto the pavement and pointed straight at Claire, his voice laced with triumph. She assaulted an officer. Arrest her. Claire knew that any resistance now would only make things worse. With countless eyes on her, from curious bystanders to the approaching officers, every action she took could be twisted into evidence against her. So, she let her body relax, her muscles going slack. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands, making it clear that she had no intention of resisting. But her calm composure only fueled Stephen's anger. With a sharp gesture, he signaled to two officers. One yanked her arm down harshly, while the other twisted her other arm behind her back, locking it into a painful position. Claire clenched her jaw, refusing to let out a sound as the cold metal of the handcuffs snapped tightly around her wrists. Pain radiated through her arms, but her eyes remained steady, denying Stephen the satisfaction of seeing her suffer. A short distance away, Carson watched everything unfold. He had seen it all, from Stephen's provocation and harassment to his deliberate escalation of the situation. His conscience twisted inside him, but fear held him back. Fear of the system. Fear of going against his fellow officers. His gaze flickered toward Claire as she was dragged toward the squad car. And in that moment, she looked straight at him, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a silent message. You know the truth? Don't let it be buried. Guilt weighed on Carson like a heavy stone. But still, he didn't move. He cast his eyes downward, staring at the dusty pavement beneath his boots, avoiding the reality unfolding in front of him. Across the street, Jamal crouched behind an old dumpster, his heart pounding. His wide eyes followed every second of Claire being dragged away. In his trembling hands, his old phone held everything, the entire truth. From the moment Stephen confronted Claire, harassed her, and forced her to defend herself, Jamal had recorded it all. And now, that video was the only thing that could save her. But Jamal knew the danger of what he held. In Southside Chicago, the truth could make you a target. The police here wouldn't hesitate to erase any evidence that threatened their power. He stared down at the phone in his hands, his fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that he held the power to change everything. As the squad car door slammed shut, Claire looked toward Jamal. Their eyes met for just a brief moment, but the message was clear. She saw him. She knew he had recorded everything, and in that silent exchange, she gave him a message. Keep it safe. Protect the truth. Inside the patrol car, Claire leaned back against the seat, her breathing steady. The silence inside the vehicle was broken only by the crackle of the police radio and the fading wail of sirens in the distance. But in her mind, every move was already being mapped out. She took inventory of everything she could use. The handcuffs were tightly locked, but not enough to fully restrict her wrist. Movement. During her training, she learned how to loosen her muscles and slip out when needed. The hidden metal pin was sewn into the inner lining of her jacket, just small, enough to pick the handcuff lock if she got the chance. The layout of the patrol car. She had been inside these vehicles before, not as a suspect, but as an investigator. She knew every detail of their locking mechanisms and weak points. As the car rolled through the crowded streets of Southside, Claire couldn't help but think of Jamal. Right now, he was her only chance. But she also knew she couldn't rely on luck alone. She had to escape before things spiraled further out of control. When the patrol car pulled up outside the police station, Claire took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was to come. She knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And no matter what happened inside those four walls, she refused to become another victim of a system she once believed in. From his hiding spot, Jamal watched the patrol car disappear down the street, his small hands gripping the phone tightly. He knew the weight of what he carried. He was holding a secret that could change everything, and he made a decision. No matter what it took, he was going to protect it. The cold clang of the patrol car door shutting behind Claire was nothing compared to the suffocating atmosphere as she was led into the local police station. Inside, flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over peeling walls, making the cramped space feel even more oppressive. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, old paperwork, and stale coffee, triggering memories of interrogations she had conducted herself in past operations. Only this time, she was the one in the hot seat. Stephen stormed in behind her, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and triumph. The swelling on his jaw made him look even more brutal, and he took every opportunity to flaunt his authority in front of his colleagues. What he didn't know, however, was that the woman he was mocking and manhandling was not an ordinary citizen. She was a highly trained CIA operative who had handled situations far more dangerous than this. "Who do you think you are?" Stephen growled as he shoved Claire into a small interrogation room. "Attacking an officer in broad daylight? You just ruined your life." Claire sat down on the icy metal chair, her wrists still bound behind her. She said nothing, only meeting Stephen's furious glare with an expression of unshaken calm. Her silence infuriated him even more. Stephen was used to fear. He was used to suspects pleading, cursing, or breaking down. But Claire did none of those things. Her composure was a direct insult to his ego. In the corner, Carson watched in silence. His gaze flickered between Claire and Stephen, his posture tense with uncertainty and guilt. He knew that what had happened at the market was not how Stephen had reported it. He knew that Claire hadn't truly resisted arrest, that Stephen had orchestrated this entire situation. But fear kept his lips sealed. His silence was complicity, and the weight of it gnawed at his conscience. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Jamal darted into a narrow alley, gripping his phone tightly. He could feel the weight of the evidence he held, more than just a video, but a truth that could save someone's life and expose corruption. But Jamal also knew one thing. He couldn't do this alone. He thought of Malik, his cousin, a journalist known for exposing police misconduct and government corruption. Malik wasn't just family. He was someone Jamal trusted completely. If there was anyone who could help bring this to light, it was him. Jamal's fingers shook slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, finding Malik's number. Every second felt like an eternity as he waited for the call to connect, fear of being discovered still looming over him. Then a voice answered. "Jamal? What's wrong?" Malik's voice was instantly alert. Jamal took a deep breath, lowering his voice as he spoke urgently. "Malik, I have something. Something big. The cops arrested a woman at the market. I recorded everything. You have to see this." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Malik's voice turned serious. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." Jamal exhaled, knowing he had made the right call. Back in the interrogation room, Claire remained still, unfazed by Stephen's aggressive pacing. Like a predator growing impatient, he prowled back and forth, throwing threats at her, trying to break her resolve. "You think staying quiet will save you?" Stephen sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You're looking at an assault charge on a police officer. I'll make sure you never see daylight again." Claire remained silent, but inside her mind was working fast. Revealing her true identity too soon could compromise her larger mission, but waiting too long might let things spiral out of control. She needed the right moment to turn the tables. Meanwhile, outside the interrogation room, Carson silently observed through a small glass window. He knew Stephen had crossed the line. His actions were not just an abuse of power, but a crime unfolding before Carson's very eyes. Yet, fear of the system and the unspoken loyalty to his fellow officers kept him silent. However, Claire's gaze before she was taken in still haunted him. He knew he stood at a crossroads. Either remain silent and become complicit, or step forward and do what was right, even if it meant facing the consequences. Tension inside the police station continued to mount, while outside, Jamal and Malik were preparing for a battle to expose the truth. Claire understood that this fight was no longer just about her. It was about an entire system of corruption that needed to be brought to light. And, when the moment came, she would be ready. While Claire remained detained in the cold interrogation room, under the dim, flickering fluorescent lights and the lingering triumph in Stephen's every word, outside, another sharp edge of the truth was beginning to take shape. Jamal sat curled up on an old plastic chair in the cramped apartment of his cousin, Malik, a freelance journalist for a local newspaper specializing in corruption and abuse of power investigations. His eyes flickered with anxiety and anticipation as he transferred a video from his outdated phone to Malik's computer. Malik played the video. At first, his face registered mild surprise, but as he continued watching, his brows furrowed deeply. He paused the video at the exact moment Stephen snatched Claire's bag and threw her belongings into the middle of the market, then fast-forwarded to the scene where Claire was handcuffed without any resistance. Malik understood the value of this footage, but he also knew that for this to be publicly exposed and have the maximum impact, he needed someone with a far greater reach than himself. "This is huge, Jamal," Malik murmured, his eyes still locked on the screen. "I need to call someone." Jamal looked up, curiosity brimming in his eyes. "Who?" Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up his phone and searched for a familiar contact. Lisa Walker. He whispered the name as if affirming it to himself. She'll know what to do. Across the city, Lisa Walker sat in her small apartment, her desk piled high with documents and thick case files. She was a well-known investigative journalist, famous for exposing scandals within the police force and local government. She was no stranger to stories of abuse of power, but when she received a message from Malik that read, "I have something you need to see. It's big," she felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. Lisa powered up her computer and opened the video file attached to the message. Within minutes, her gaze sharpened like the edge of a blade. What she saw was not just another case of misconduct. This was blatant brutality. An officer attacking and arresting an innocent woman in broad daylight in front of a crowd with no justifiable reason. She rewound the footage, scrutinizing every detail. The aggressive, prejudiced way Stephen approached Claire. Claire's composed demeanor despite the continuous provocation. The hesitation in Carson's stance. The officer standing behind Stephen was uncomfortable with what was happening. Most importantly, the moment Claire was handcuffed without resisting, Stephen called for backup and lied, claiming she had assaulted an officer. Lisa leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her short hair. She knew she had stumbled upon a major story, but, more importantly, this was an opportunity to expose a piece of the corrupt system she had been chasing her entire career. Without hesitation, Lisa called Malik. "I'll take care of this. Keep in touch with the witnesses. If anything else comes up, let me know immediately." Within hours, Lisa had edited the video, highlighting the key moments. She added annotations, clarifying every crucial point. The identity of Officer Stephen, who had multiple complaints against him in the past but had always been protected. The time and location of the incident are backed by testimonies from witnesses at the Southside Market, and, most notably, the silence of young Officer Carson, subtly hinting at the culture of cover-ups within the police force. Lisa knew that timing was everything. If the video was released too late, the police department would have time to control the narrative and twist the facts. But if it was released at the right moment, public pressure could overwhelm them before they had a chance to react. She opened her social media platforms, independent news channels with hundreds of thousands of followers, blogs, and forums where she knew the information would spread like wildfire. She typed out the title, "You Can Be Arrested Even When You Did Nothing Wrong. The Truth About Police Abuse in Southside Chicago." With a single click, Lisa pushed the video into the public eye. But she didn't stop there. She quickly reached out to fellow journalists, sending the footage and details to other investigative reporters who weren't afraid to dig deeper. As the video began to spread across social media, a wave of public outrage erupted. Within minutes, thousands of shares, comments, and discussions flooded in. People across Chicago began speaking out, not just about Claire's case, but about the abuses they had witnessed, yet remained silent about until now. The police department, accustomed to controlling information and covering up scandals, was now feeling the pressure. Meanwhile, Stephen, still gloating inside the station, was completely unaware that a storm was brewing outside and that his power play was about to collapse. In the interrogation room, Claire sat still, her gaze sharp and unwavering. She didn't need to say anything. She knew that the truth was already out there, and the fight was no longer confined within these four walls. The ticking of the clock echoed through the cold interrogation room, marking every tense second. Claire sat motionless on the rigid metal chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Through the frosted glass, she could sense the hostile and smug gaze of Stephen watching her, while Carson stood silently by his side, his expression filled with inner conflict. Outside, the video Lisa had released was spreading like wildfire, yet Stephen remained oblivious to the fact that the world outside was crumbling beneath him. To him, Claire was just another defenseless woman who dared to challenge police authority, and now he was going to relish every moment of crushing that defiance. Stephen pushed open the door and slammed it shut behind him, the sound reverberating like a hammer striking the silence. He stepped closer to Claire, a smirk of triumph playing on his lips. "You think you can stay silent forever?" he sneered, leaning in, his eyes glinting with malice. "You have no one to protect you. In here, I am the law." Claire lifted her head, her gaze no longer just calm but razor sharp, a look of someone who fully understood the game being played. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Stephen to feel most confident so that her counterattack would hurt the most. "Do you think so?" Her voice was low but carried an unmistakable authority that made Stephen hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Do you believe you can do whatever you want without consequences?" Stephen chuckled, but the certainty in his laughter wavered. He had never encountered someone like Claire, someone who wasn't just unafraid, but who seemed to be in control despite being restrained. Claire slowly stood up, her movements measured but unwavering. She twisted her wrists slightly, and in a single, precise motion, the handcuffs clattered to the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Stephen's eyes widened in shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Before he could react, Claire reached inside her coat and pulled out a small black leather wallet. She flipped it open and held it up for Stephen to see. Under the dim light, the CIA emblem gleamed unmistakably. "I am Special Agent Claire Danes, CIA." she stated, her voice as sharp as a blade slicing through the tension in the room. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your life." For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The color drained from Stephen's face, his smug confidence shattering instantly. He took an instinctive step back, his eyes darting between Claire and the badge as if he had just realized he wasn't caught in a minor police scandal. He was entangled in a disaster beyond his control. You're joking, right?" Stephen stammered, though his voice was now devoid of any arrogance. This has to be fake." Claire stepped forward, her gaze locking onto his like a predator assessing its prey. "Do I look like I'm joking?" she whispered, each word slicing through the thick air like ice. "You didn't just assault a civilian. You attacked and obstructed a federal agent while she was conducting an investigation." Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he glanced toward the door, searching for support from Carson. But Carson stood frozen in place, his face pale as the weight of the situation finally dawned on him. He had suspected something was off from the start, but now the full reality hit him like a freight train. At that moment, the interrogation room door swung open again. Two men in dark suits entered, federal badges gleaming on their lapels. They needed no introduction. Their presence alone sent an unspoken message. One of them fixed his cold, unwavering gaze on Stephen and announced in a voice that left no room for argument. "Officer Stephen, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal agent, falsifying reports, and obstructing a CIA investigation." Stephen stammered, his wide eyes darting around the room, searching for someone, anyone who could save him. But all he found were silent, unreadable expressions, even from the very officers who once followed his lead. Carson pressed himself against the wall, his expression vacant, as if the world around him had collapsed. He had known the truth from the beginning, and now that it had been laid bare, the guilt weighed on him heavier than ever. He could no longer escape it. Silence was no longer an option. As Stephen was led through the precinct in handcuffs, more officers began gathering, whispering in hushed voices. Shock and disbelief rippled through the station. No one had expected Stephen, the untouchable officer, the one who always held the power, to be dragged away like a common criminal. Some looked on with satisfaction, but most were simply afraid. Because if Stephen could fall, it meant others could too. Claire stepped out of the interrogation room, her gaze sweeping across the gathered officers. She was no longer the wrongfully accused detainee, but a symbol of justice and defiance. Eyes followed her, some with newfound respect, others with lingering uncertainty. One of the federal agents turned to Carson, whose stare remained locked on Stephen's retreating figure. His voice was firm, yet held an unmistakable weight of expectation. "We need your testimony. You witnessed everything, didn't you?" Carson stood rigid. The words rang in his ears like a sentence. He knew he couldn't run from this anymore. Claire, standing nearby, said nothing, but her gaze spoke volumes. Do the right thing. Carson swallowed hard, his heart pounding violently in his chest. He recalled every moment at the market, from Stephen's smug expression as he approached Claire to his hesitation when he failed to intervene. He had the chance to stop this from the very beginning, but he had chosen silence. Now, Carson stood at a crossroads. Continue to stay silent and let his conscience torment him for the rest of his life, or stand up and speak the truth, knowing full well that doing so could cost him his career and the trust of his colleagues. After a long, tense silence, Carson finally took a deep breath. His eyes met Claire's, filled with determination, but also understanding. Slowly, he nodded. "I will testify." His voice was hoarse but firm. Carson's decision was not just a personal reckoning. It was a critical piece in dismantling the corrupt system within the police force. With his testimony, this was no longer just a federal agent's word against a police officer. It was an undeniable truth, confirmed by someone on the inside. Stephen was dragged away, his frantic gaze darting around the precinct, searching desperately for one last escape route. But he knew. Every door had closed. The fear and unchecked power he had once wielded to control others had now become the weight pulling him into the abyss. As for Claire, though she had turned the tables, she knew this fight was far from over. Stephen was merely the tip of the iceberg. The system enabling men like him ran far deeper. But with every step forward, with every person like Carson who chose to stand up, and every video like Jamal's that exposed the truth, Claire believed that justice would continue to shine its light into even the darkest corners of corruption. As Stephen was escorted out of the police station, the initial whispers quickly turned into a wildfire of news spreading across social media platforms. Jamal's video, shared by Lisa Walker, was more than just evidence of a single officer's misconduct. It was the spark that ignited a long smoldering fury within the South Side Chicago community. Within hours of the video's release, thousands of shares and comments flooded online platforms. Locals and past victims of police abuse began speaking up. Stories that had been buried under fear and systemic pressure were finally being brought to light. I was arrested for no reason on that very same street, but no one believed me. He's not the only one. The whole system here is rotten. Finally, someone dared to stand up. Comments like these flooded forums and news sites, revealing that the outrage extended far beyond Claire's case. It was the accumulated anger from decades of injustice and oppression. Lisa Walker, after publishing the video, dug deeper into the story. Her investigative article, titled "Beneath the Facade of Justice: The Truth About Police Abuse in Southside Chicago," exposed not just Stephen's actions, but an entire network of misconduct within the department. She interviewed other victims who had suffered harassment and brutality at the hands of Stephen and other officers. People who had once been too afraid to speak, out now, found their voices. Witnesses came forward, sharing stories that had been ignored or buried in the past. The Chicago Police Department could no longer ignore the growing pressure. Within 48 hours of the video going viral, the city's mayor was forced to make a public statement, promising a full-scale internal investigation. What began as an inquiry into Stephen's actions quickly expanded, uncovering other officers involved in similar abuses. Complaint files that had been forgotten were suddenly reopened. Internal interviews were conducted, revealing a disturbing pattern of excessive force, falsified reports, and witness intimidation. The consequences were inevitable. Stephen was prosecuted, not only for assaulting Claire but for a series of offenses linked to his abuse of power and manipulation of evidence in other cases. Carson, who had bravely testified, became a symbol of change for those within the force who wanted to reform the system. Though he faced isolation from some colleagues, he gained support from the community and human rights organizations. 3 other officers from Stephen's patrol unit were fired and placed under investigation for their involvement in similar abuses. Several others were suspended pending further inquiry. But beyond the police force, the Southside Chicago community began to change. Peaceful protests were organized outside the police headquarters, with banners demanding justice not just for Claire, but for all the victims. Social justice organizations and activists joined the fight, calling for comprehensive police reform across the city. And then there was Jamal, the 12-year-old boy who had hidden behind a trash bin to record the pivotal video. He became a symbol of courage and the power of ordinary citizens. His story was shared across news outlets, emphasizing that anyone, no matter how small or young, could create change. Meanwhile, Claire, after everything had settled, returned to her work at the CIA. But this case left a lasting mark on her. She hadn't just completed a mission, she had unknowingly become the catalyst for a movement against injustice. Claire's case was not just a story about police abuse and justice being restored. It was proof that when the truth is exposed, it can trigger a wave of change greater than anyone could imagine. Southside Chicago still had many challenges ahead, but this time the community had found its voice, and they would never be silent again. As the bright lights of the protests faded in the distance, Claire stood beside her car, her gaze lingering on the streets of Southside Chicago, a place that had become more than just an investigation site during her time there. Her mission was complete, but the memories of the city would stay with her forever. She hadn't come here to be a symbol. Her original goal was simple: to shut down an arms trafficking ring threatening national security. But, in the process, she had accidentally become the spark that illuminated hidden crimes, exposing years of corruption buried in darkness. Claire knew change didn't come from just one person, but sometimes one small action could ignite an entire movement. Before leaving, Claire made one last stop: the rundown housing complex where Jamal lived. She found him sitting on the front steps, his eyes staring off into the distance. But when he saw Claire, his face lit up. He was no longer the shy kid who avoided the gaze of police officers. Now, he had become a voice for the unheard, representing a generation that refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Claire approached him with a gentle smile and a firm handshake. "You did something many adults wouldn't dare to do," she said, her voice calm but filled with pride. "Never lose that courage, Jamal. The truth always needs someone to defend it." Jamal nodded, his eyes shining with newfound conviction. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with what he had learned from Claire and everything he had witnessed, he understood that his voice had the power to change an entire community. As Claire drove away from Southside, the wind brushed through her open window, carrying the familiar sounds of the city: the honking of cars, hip-hop beats blasting from old speakers, and in the distance, the laughter of children playing on the sidewalks. Her emotions were mixed, part relief that her mission was complete, but also a deep, lingering contemplation. She hadn't set out to be a hero, but her choices had brought the truth into the light. Claire understood something deeply now. Sometimes you don't choose the battle chooses you. And when that happens, you have to stand firm, no matter the cost. She thought of Stephen, the man who had once believed he could abuse his power without consequence. She thought of Carson, the officer who had found the courage to stand for the truth. And she thought of Jamal, the unknown boy who had become a beacon of hope for his community. Southside Chicago still had struggles ahead. Change wouldn't happen overnight, and justice wasn't always immediate or complete. But Claire knew that she had helped ignite something real. And more importantly, she had passed the torch to those willing to keep fighting. As the city disappeared in her rearview mirror, Claire smiled. A smile not just of satisfaction, but of a silent promise to herself. Sometimes you don't choose the battle, but when it chooses you, stand your ground. Because sometimes all it takes is one brave person to change everything. And that is the story of Claire Danes, a CIA agent who didn't just complete her mission, but inadvertently became the spark that set justice ablaze in Southside Chicago. What do you think about this story? If you were in Carson's position, would you have had the courage to speak out against injustice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage and justice. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.